Hi guys, my name's JoINrbs, and for the last year or so I've been a bug tester and design advisor on Long War 2, made by Pavonis Interactive. It's a complete overhaul of vanilla XCOM 2, and I'm trying to get some of the information that's up here out to there in this series, where I'm reviewing each of the 8 main classes in the game, and just trying to say what I think about them, what their strengths and weaknesses are, who they synergize well with, where they're awkward, what missions they're great on, so on and so forth. Hopefully, watching this series will give you a better idea of how best to use these soldiers. Today I'm going to be talking about the early game technical. And the technical is probably the most unique soldier introduced in Long War 2. A consumable-based soldier, largely dependent on his rocket launcher and flamethrower to deal good damage and control enemies. Now, throughout this series, I'm going to be using a couple of metrics, which I want to introduce now for you. First off, we have an alpha striking metric. When I say alpha strike, what I mean is a soldier's ability to kill enemies before they can act. And in XCOM, how that typically looks is an enemy pod patrols into you, and you'll take some overwatches against that pod as it's patrolling in, typically, and then you get a turn where your soldiers get to act against the enemy pod and try to kill all of it. So a soldier who's very good at overwatching and shooting could have a very high alpha strike rating, whereas a soldier who was more loaded up with medkits and smoke grenades would have a lower alpha strike rating. The other metric I'm going to be rating these soldiers with is breakdown strength. And a breakdown is when your alpha strike fails and enemies are active, they're getting to attack you, they may be flanking you, they may be casting psi abilities on you, and a soldier's ability to survive and excel in these conditions is going to get tested. Soldiers who are very mobile, who are able to dodge incoming fire, who are able to deal with enemies using crowd control, disorientation, burning, stuff like that, to delay the problem for another turn, just survive until XCOM can finally bring their power to bear on the aliens and deal with the problem once and for all, are going to score very high in their breakdown strength. And technicals, I'm starting off in early game with an alpha strike strength of 7 out of 10 and a breakdown rating of 9 out of 10. Both of these are very good. Technicals are very good soldiers in the early game. The reason that technicals are so good in the early game is tied heavily to their identity as a class. They're soldiers who bring a rocket and 2 flamethrower charges into battle with them on their Gauntlet, their secondary weapon, which is free from game start and doesn't require any consumable space or anything like that. So on this soldier, as a squatty, you can have 2 flamethrower charges, 1 rocket, and then if you wanted, you could also have 3 grenades. That's 6 turns of combat where you don't even have to think about firing a gun, and each of those consumables is strong enough to probably deal with, 1/2 to a full enemy, which means that if you're bringing this soldier to an extremely light mission where you have 4 other soldiers and you have to kill 9 enemies, the soldier is going to accidentally kill 3 enemies by itself without you having to have picked any perks or given it any other equipment or anything at all like that. So this squatty perk heavy weapons, which is giving the flamethrower charges and letting you fire the rocket, I'm rating extremely highly. Rated at 9 for breakdowns because the flamethrower is just no questions asked reliable damage early in the game, and on top of that has a chance to burn enemies, which deals on average another 3 or 4 damage and makes them incapable of attacking you for a full extra turn. Very, very, very strong. I only give the technical heavy weapons perk 7 out of 10 for alpha striking. The reason for that is that the flamethrower is not that amazing at alpha striking. You have to move forward to use it pretty regularly, which can pull extra enemies, which is the absolute opposite of alpha striking. That's activating more enemies. We've got this backwards, And the rocket launcher, while extremely powerful if it hits, does have considerable scatter early in the game. And so these are still really, really strong. I still gave 7 out of 10, which is way above average, but That's why this isn't a 10 out of 10. The rocket launcher can scatter and can be a little bit unreliable for alpha striking, and the flamethrower does have limited range. It's even a lower range than a frag grenade, so you have to engineer scenarios where the technical's getting up closer to enemies. They really excel in breakdowns because of what happens if they get close to enemies, but sometimes on alpha striking turns where you don't want to move forward, other soldiers are going to be a little bit better than them in some situations. Alright, cool. So let's talk about some actual decisions with the technical tree and look at these Lance Corporal perks. I'm going to throw suppression out straight away. Although you don't have to not take it. A lot of these perks are very heavily tied to the technical's consumable use, and the strength of the consumable use for the technical changes vastly as the campaign progresses and your tech advances. You might upgrade the gauntlet as a priority, or you might not, and the technical's consumables will either get much better or much worse depending on that. Enemy hit points are going to scale, their immunity to fire is going to start showing up, especially with robotic enemies, and so the flamethrower and the rocket launcher may no longer be able to as reliably kill enemies outright. There are all these reasons that a perk like Fire in the Hole or a perk like Roust is going to change in value over the course of a game, whereas Suppression is a pretty reliable, steady perk throughout an entire campaign. Some enemies are going to be less affected by it than others, and I think that's especially true of late game where enemies are picking up things like Shadow Step and Lightning Reflexes and higher health bars and so on and so forth. There are also more enemies in late game, so suppressing one isn't quite as valuable. But hey, it's an okay perk. You can take suppression on the technical. It will be a scrappy technical. It won't have the explosive early game power that Fire in the Hole or Roust can give you. It won't quite have the same insane scaling that Roust can give you, and we'll talk about that next. But it's okay. So don't take suppression, but if you do, I think it's cool. You can make a soldier that does something with that. Fire in the Hole is insanely good. I gave it 8 out of 10 for alpha striking, 4 out of 10 on a breakdown because, one, if you're going to fire a rocket with the technical, you don't really want to move in the same turn, which means that you are being forced to start the turn in heavy cover, which is very expensive. Other soldiers want that heavy cover, etc., etc. Or you're going to end up out of heavy cover, which is very dangerous. So not as good in breakdowns to be firing rockets just in general, but Fire in the Hole allows your rocket to hit far more reliably. I would say that you're reducing scatter by, well, on average, you're reducing scatter by exactly half, but because of the marginal value of tiles scattered, I think that the effectiveness of the rocket is more than doubled by taking Fire in the Hole, which is sort of an insane thing to say, because it's already an insane consumable, and people will take Roust and fire the rocket and get really good results sometimes. The thing is, without Fire in the Hole, sometimes your rocket is going to scatter, going to miss the center of 3 enemies or whatever. Instead of killing 3 enemies outright, pretty much, you're going to just like remove cover from 1 or something like that. So Fire in the Hole is insanely good early in the game, where your rocket can basically wipe out an entire pod by itself, which leaves almost nothing left on the map if you're playing extremely light guerrilla operations and things like that. Good perk. Roust, I rated 4 out of 10 for alpha striking. This is a very long range flamethrower shot, which doesn't deal very much damage. But I rated it 8 out of 10 for breakdowns because, 1, it's another charge with the flamethrower, which can actually really matter if you're having an extended breakdown where you just want a flamethrower every single turn. And 2, Roust often ends up taking 2 chances to burn enemies because it will roll to try to burn them, and it also rolls to set the tile that they're on fire, and Roust forces enemies to move. So if it successfully sets the tile they're on fire, and then they move out of that tile, they may be set on fire themselves. So Roust is great for controlling enemies, and Roust scales extraordinarily well into the later game because of the massive AoE that it has and how good the burn chance is on it. Burn chance increases as you get better gauntlets for your technicals, and so this is just going to get better at applying burn. I pick either Fire in the Hole or Roust on my technicals based basically on whether I want immediate power with Fire in the Hole or better scaling power with Roust. I'm going to take Fire in the Hole for this particular one because I think that the build that develops out of it is really interesting and I want to show you what happens. But, you know, feel free to take Roust as well, and it just does something slightly different. At Corporal, we have a really tough decision between three perks, which are all very, very strong. Technicals early in the game, very strong. Let's go left to right. We just took Fire in the Hole, and so biggest booms is letting grenades and standard rockets inflict critical damage, and there's a 50% chance of dealing +2 damage on your grenade or your rocket. Now, technicals aren't going to be throwing that many grenades. It's somewhat of a waste of a consumable slot on them because they already have a rocket and 2 flamethrowers, so they already have 3 turn-ending consumables, which are very good. It's unlikely that you really want to load them down with the frag grenade as well. So let's just write that off and just apply this only to the rocket. You may notice that I gave this a 7 out of 10 for alpha striking, so if it's only applying to one action on each mission, it must be pretty good, right? Yeah, it's pretty good. 50% chance for +2 damage is pretty similar to center mass in alpha striking strength, if we're talking about extremely light missions early in the game, which is sort of where we are right now. If you think about what center mass is doing for a soldier on one of those missions, the soldier realistically could hit an enemy 3 times on a mission, and that would be pretty impressive, I would say. Take 3 shots and hit 3 enemies, take 6 shots and miss half of them and hit 3 enemies, whatever. I'll be impressed if a soldier hits enemies 3 times with his gun on an extremely light operation, just because enemies are going to be getting evaporated by grenades, by flamethrowers, by area suppression. Stuff like that is going to be killing enemies before your soldier with an assault rifle can get all the bullets off. And even your soldier with an assault rifle may want to be fragging because it's a 100% reliable action. You just have so many consumables to use. Center mass isn't that great yet. Center mass scales better than biggest booms. But at this stage in the game, you know, your rocket is going to reliably hit 3 enemies if you've taken Fire in the Hole. The rating's sort of conditional on taking Fire in the Hole. And on average, it's going to deal an extra 3 damage. And dealing an extra 3 damage on an extremely light mission is really, really, really good. It's really good. It's like getting an extra frag grenade on an enemy or something. It will just push you over the top and make a mission which might have had return fire at you, might have taken a wound or 2, into a flawless mission because the enemies just died outright. So biggest booms is quite strong. Even with it being so strong, and the rating again is conditional on taking Fire in the Hole. If you didn't take Fire in the Hole at Lance Corporal, it's not nearly as good. Fortify, I think, is generally going to just be better. Fortify on a technical lets the technical move out of cover to turn the flamethrower on, and that's really exciting. So it's got a 5-turn cooldown, which means it's probably only getting used once on a timed mission. It will come up more than once on untimed missions pretty regularly. But this plus 20 defense is giving you 2/3 of light cover by itself. And if you pair that with some smoke, perhaps from burnout or from a smoke grenade from an assisting soldier, an aid protocol, you can build heavy cover for a technical very easily. And a technical has a reason for you to build heavy cover for it. The flamethrower is extremely valuable, but it's somewhat short range. Another reason that Fortify is so great on the technical is that once the technical is out of consumables on longer missions later on in the campaign, there isn't very much for the technical to do other than stand in cover and try to just sort of control enemies. Let the enemies shoot at it instead of other people, flank enemies so that they can't take certain positions which might make your damage dealing soldiers more vulnerable, things like that. And Fortify is really, really good at that. It's a very good perk which fits the technical's desire to get out of line, get out of cover, and deal some weird damage in weird ways, and also fits the technical's desire to just be a derpy tank later on in the campaign when the consumables have run out and there isn't much that it's good at doing anymore. Fortify is my typical perk here for any of the Lance Corporal choices. I really like Fortify. Napalm-X is also very good. Napalm-X can disorient or panic enemies, so if you fail to burn them, now you're getting a chance to control them in some other way. It's very good early in the game when your Flamethrower only has, I think it's something like a 40% chance to burn at tier 1, but the tier 2 and tier 3 gauntlets have much higher burn chances on their Flamethrowers, and so Napalm-X, in my opinion, goes down considerably as the campaign wears on. So I often try to avoid it to let my technical scale a little bit better into late game with Fortify in order to, make up for the fact that it's a poor late game soldier, but a very good early game soldier who will likely be picking up a lot of experience and be high level when I need high level soldiers who can do something. So I gave Napalm-X a 5 on Alpha Striking because of the ability to control enemies who might otherwise not be controlled, which lets you kill them next turn without having to worry about it. Essentially, you extend the length of time you have to Alpha Strike if you can control enemies. And an 8 out of 10 for breakdowns because of just how strong that control is when you need it. But, like I said, typically, I really like Fortify here quite a lot. At Sergeant, I think this is the easiest choice of the 3 that we've been faced so far. And we can throw Concussion Rocket out of contention straight away. It fires a special rocket which has a stun chance on enemies, a disorient chance on enemies, and creates a smoke cloud. That's a really powerful effect, and it's really cool. And there are unique situations where you would love to be able to do that. For example, if you're waiting for evac, trying to get away from enemies, a concussion rocket's going to be outstanding. Really good. Unfortunately, I pretty much just ran out of reasons you'd want to use it. If you're stunning enemies, it's very detrimental to be leaving them a smoke cloud. You want to stun some of the enemies and kill the ones who are unstunned typically. That's why sting grenades are so powerful. You can put an AoE chance to stun on enemies and then kill the ones who don't get stunned. But with concussion rocket, the ones who don't get stunned are going to be in a cloud of smoke. So that's unfortunate. It's not that bad an ability. It just doesn't fit with regular XCOM play. It doesn't really fit into the Alpha Strike strategy. It doesn't make very much sense in a breakdown. It's just a very messy sort of perk. And so I rated it quite poorly. I gave it 4 out of 10 because it has some breakdown strength as a control tool, and also it's putting smoke out, which you can make use of if you're clever enough. But yeah, it's pretty terrible at Alpha Striking, I think, and in general, not a very appealing perk. Burnout, the Flamethrower leaves a smoke cloud and provides, extra defense for your technical whenever you use a Flamethrower. This is a really cool perk. One thing you can do, which isn't immediately obvious maybe, but can be quite strong, is just turn your Flamethrower into a smoke grenade. You can fire the Flamethrower at nothing, just set the ground on fire next to you, and have smoke for not just the technical, but other soldiers who are next to the technical as well, which is a pretty nice resource to have, to be sure. I gave this a 3 out of 10 for Alpha Striking. It does let the technical move forward and use the Flamethrower in sort of the same way that Fortify does, and so that's pretty valuable for Alpha Striking. Provide some defense for the technical in case other pods pull or something like that. And I gave it an 8 out of 10 for breakdowns, because legitimately, this is a very, very, very good perk in a breakdown. Anytime that you have an action which is already amazing, and all of a sudden you're also able to give plus 20 defense to multiple members of your team with it, that's really cool. Very cool. The reason that this perk isn't 10 out of 10 on a breakdown and stuff like that is that smoke is already available from other sources. So this doesn't really add cumulatively with your ability to defense stack. You can have a smoke grenade on a Grenadier who can even have dense smoke in the middle of the game. That's a pretty common thing to have available. And that Grenadier could have just smoke grenaded when you needed it, and you would have even more defense from the grenade because it was dense smoke instead of regular smoke. So It's a nice ability, but if you're really putting together a focus strategy to maximize what your squad does, it's an obsolete ability. It gets done better by somebody else. Very good in scrappy situations and breakdowns where, things are starting to fall apart, and so you need this ability to be a little bit better. But if you're structured and in control of a situation, this perk doesn't really do that much. Even when you do need smoke, it still doesn't really do that much. So it's a good perk, but it's not my pick at Sergeant, basically ever. My pick at Sergeant is pretty much always Shredder. Primary weapon attacks shred armor, and that may seem like a very odd choice. On this soldier, I've been saying nonstop, this soldier is about consumables, the flamethrowers, the rockets, etc. I haven't mentioned the technical's gun a single time yet. You may notice that this soldier is carrying an SMG rather than an assault rifle. I think that will be pretty normal, at least in the beginning of the campaign, to get extra mobility to use the flamethrower better. The reason that Shredder is my pick here is that it scales amazingly well late into the game. It will shred 1 armor with a ballistic weapon, but it shreds 2 armor for even just a graze on an enemy with a laser weapon or mag weapon, and it shreds 3 armor. I just made 5 with my finger. It shreds 3 armor with a coil weapon or a plasma weapon. That's insane. And something that I say regularly in the series and will continue to say a lot is your soldiers overwatch all the time in this game. Even if you're not building an Overwatch soldier, so often if you're not in combat right now, you're ending your turn by overwatching, and pods are patrolling into you, eating those Overwatch shots, and that's the mechanic by which you find yourself in combat again. And so this Shredder ammo is going to be applying on Overwatch over and over and over again throughout the campaign. And shredding like 2 armor off a mech is really good. It's more than 2 extra damage, probably, because you're probably going to shoot the mech a couple of times the next turn, and it will not be protected by its 2 armor. Shredder also gives the technical something really valuable to do once, the consumables have fallen off on long run timed missions or something like that. Because, again, like shredding some armor fairly reliably, all you have to do is graze, and technicals actually have quite good aim scaling. They gain 18 aim as they level up, which is only 2 lower aim scaling than rangers. It's the same aim scaling as gunners. Yeah, you just have to hit a shot, and all of a sudden, even if you're equipped like a laser SMG, your shot deals a huge amount more damage effectively because it turns into a force multiplier. Every shot that you have against that target from now until the target's dead is dealing extra damage because the armor is gone. So I'm a huge fan of Shredder here, and I'm just really fascinated in general by this tree. I picked these 3 perks, but you can go Roust, Napalm-X, Burnout, and it's great. I think you can go Suppression Fortify Shredder, and it's not really that bad, but lacks the early game punch. You can go Fire in the Hole, Biggest Boom Shredder. You can take Concussion Rocket if you really want, but I don't think you ever need to. I can't imagine myself going Fire in the Hole Napalm-X, and I can't imagine myself going Roust into Biggest Booms. But in general, there's a lot of ability to move laterally in this tree based on what you identify as strong. And even Fire in the Hole, Fortify, Burnout is not an unreasonable thing to be starting on the technical. So, I hope you guys enjoyed hearing my thoughts about the early game technical. And I will see you guys next time with the middle game technical. We're going to start getting toward the part of the campaign where the consumables are running out regularly on missions, and where, primary weapons are upgraded to a point where technicals, actual regular shots, start to do relatively large amounts of damage compared to the consumables, and things are going to get pretty interesting. So, I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'll see you next time with more of JoINrbs reviews, Long War 2's classes.